Weeks into 2015, and there already have been 8 reported murders of transgender women so far in this country just this year. 8 murders. And a dear friend of mine reached out to me just enraged and infuriated. And it is enraging and it is infuriating, but as much of an epidemic as this is, as outrageous as this is the standard in terms of if we look back on the last, decade at least of statistics that we have on the murders of trans women. This is basically on par. This is, our lives are routinely threatened. Our lives are routinely in danger. We are often taken out in the streets for being who we are, for living in the intersections of poverty, race, gender, and so often there's not any national outcry around it. There's no rage, and there's no sense of trans lives really mattering. We have this amazing movement, Black Lives Matter, that has been sweeping across the country. So often, so many of these trans folks who are being murdered are also Black. Black trans lives matter as well. And when people exist at the intersections of multiple identities, one solution is not enough. Stories like Elon Nettles touch me to my core, because I know, but for the grace of God, I could be Elon Nettles. Far too often I have been walking down the street, I've been catcalled. One of the people catcalling me realized I'm trans, and it very easily could have turned deadly. There was a moment about 13 years ago. I was living on the Upper West Side at the time, and I was walking to the 72nd Street subway, and it was the 4th of July. I was wearing a red, white, and blue dress. It was really tight. I was feeling very patriotic. And I passed this two young men, and one of the young men appeared to be Latino, and the other young man appeared to be African American. And as I passed, the Latin guy said, "Yo, Ma, you looking sexy today. Yo, can I holler at you, yo?" Something like that. And then the African American guy says, "Yo, dude, that's the N-word, yo." Something like that. And then the Latin guy says, "She look too good to be an N-word, that's a B-word, yo." And then they began to argue. "That's the N-word, that's a B-word, that's an N-word, that's a B-word." And I'm standing there waiting for the light to change. She's saying, "God, get me out of here." And I got out of there safely, thank God. But this moment makes me think about the interesting intersections of identity and oppression that so many trans folks, particularly Black trans women of color, experience every day. So let's break this moment down a little bit. So first of all, I'm catcalled because I'm a woman, and some trans women I've met and spoken to feel being catcalled is somehow affirming for them. I've never felt that way. I've always felt unsafe when I'm catcalled. I've often felt that these men are trying to objectify me, trying to take ownership of my body in public space, and I often feel very unsafe, and it feels like this misogynist act. So we have this misogynist act of me being catcalled, and then I am misgendered when they realize I am trans, and so we have this transphobic moment. Julia Serrano coined the term transmisogyny to denote the intersection of transphobia and misogyny. And then we have the racial component, the use of the N-word. Now, we all understand that the N-word can be re-signified based on context. Hip-hop shows us that. But I've come to understand that the N-word in this context, usually uttered by another person of color, is tantamount to saying that's a man. But not only that's a man, but that's a Black man. And two, I've often said the truth of my experience, that most of the bullying and harassment I've experienced in my lifetime has been from other Black folks. And I'm always careful to say this is not to suggest that Black folks are more homophobic or transphobic than everybody else, because I don't believe that. And it is a really dangerous myth to perpetrate, but I want to tell the truth of my story. But Black folks are not more homophobic or transphobic than everybody else. But I do believe that marginalized folks often police each other. So Black folks police other Black folks, women police other women, gay folks police other gay folks, trans folks police other trans folks, etc., etc. And I think for Black folks in this country, there's another component. In this country, in America, we have a literal history of emasculating Black men in this country. During slavery, during Jim Crow, Black male bodies were routinely lynched, and during these lynchings, their genitalia was often cut off. Sometimes it was pickled and sold. That is a literal history of emasculating Black men in this country. That is our shared history as Americans, a dirty, horrible, awful history, but that is our history. And I believe that a lot of black folks seeing me in various incarnations of my femininity throughout my life have imagined that I am the realization of the historic emasculation of black men, and they have lashed out at me in a tremendous amount of pain. There's this wonderful expression, hurt people, hurt people. Hurt people, hurt people. And the experiences of experiencing oppression and discrimination is deeply, deeply painful. And I think sometimes we're walking around with so much pain that we don't know what to do with it, so we take it out on each other. So the question for me becomes, how do we begin to create spaces of healing around all this so we can really do the work of liberating ourselves and each other? There was a moment about a decade ago. I was on the subway in New York City, and there was this woman staring at me, this black woman staring at me with all of this contempt. And I usually don't respond when people give me that kind of energy, but this particular day I had to. I said, "Excuse me, do you have a problem?" And she said to me, "I think you should die." And I'll never forget this moment and the contempt and the anger and the rage that she had towards me. But she didn't even know me. Obviously, she was going through some stuff that I have no idea what that was. And I have a lot of love for the sister. And I understand that she was probably in a tremendous amount of pain. And so when I think about healing, I can't help but think about my mother. About 8 months into my medical transition, I called my mother and I said, "Mom, I'm transitioning. I'm really a woman. That's what's been going on with me my whole life." And the first thing my mother said to me was, "But you have such big hands and feet." That was the very first thing she said to me. Like the first thing. I'm like, "Really, Mom? It's not about that, and it's gonna be okay." But it was hard for my mom. She had to get used to using a different name to refer to me. Laverne, by the way, was always my middle name before I transitioned. Cox was always my last name. Thought of changing it, but my mother's Gloria Cox, my grandmother's Emma Cox. And so when I transitioned, I just dropped my old first name. So she had to get used to calling me a different name. She had to get used to using different gendered pronouns to refer to me. And pronouns matter, by the way, when we talk with and about transgender people. Pronouns matter. There was a moment about a year and a half ago. I was going to the Callan Lord Community Health Center, where I'd been going to get my health care for over a decade, in the Callan Lord Community Health Center, actually named after Audre Lorde, whose birthday is today. The Callan Lord Community Health Center is a health center in New York City that caters to the LGBTQ community, and this had never happened to me. This particular day, I was waiting in the exam room, and the nurse comes in and says, "Hi, my name is David. I identify as male, and my preferred gender pronouns are he and him. How about you?" And I was like, "Work." That was the first thing I said, "Work." But I love that. It's a great way to create safe space for people to identify on their own terms. Creating safe space for people to identify on their own terms. I'm proud to report that now, when someone uses the wrong pronoun to refer to me in front of my mother, she now corrects them. Yeah. That's pretty awesome, but it was not easy getting there. It took many, many years, many very difficult conversations across difference, me sending her books, articles, and videos to educate her. But I'm very lucky and blessed, and my mother's always wanted me in her life. She has always wanted me to be happy, and so we worked through it, we got there. But it took us not always having the safest space, but having the courage to have very difficult conversations across difference. Speaking of which, this year's Creating Change conference just happened, and about a year ago, I gave the opening keynote at the Creating Change conference, which was in Houston, Texas, and I was totally freaking out about what I was going to say to this particular group of activists at Creating Change. And so I called my dear friend Jeremiah Johnson, who was at the conference, and I said, "Jeremiah, I'm freaking out, help." And he comes to my room and he reminds me that he and I have had some very difficult conversations conversations across difference. Jeremiah is a white gay man who is living with HIV. He's a fierce AIDS activist. And he reminded me that he's often not known what the right things to say to me might be, a black transgender woman. He's been afraid of saying the wrong things to me. He reminded me I've always not known what the right things to say to him might be. I've been afraid of saying the wrong things to him, a person living with HIV. But we had those conversations anyway. We created safe space so that we can make mistakes and take risk. And we had those conversations with a lot of love and a lot of empathy. And I gotta tell you, I am so happy that we did that. The understanding that I have now of the ways in which we continue to stigmatize people living with HIV in this country. I wouldn't have that understanding if it weren't for my relationship and those difficult conversations I had with Jeremiah. So I would love to charge each and every one of you tonight to have those difficult conversations across difference, but create safe space so that you can make mistakes and take risk and have those conversations with a tremendous amount of love and empathy. Empathy, remember, is the antidote to shame. Have those conversations towards getting to a better understanding of who the other person is and ultimately of who you are. Thank you.